My name is Emma Rodriguez. I'm 29 years old, and I own a $12 million investment firm in Denver, Colorado. 4 years ago, my younger sister Sophia destroyed my relationship and broke my heart at our grandfather's birthday party. Last month, I fired her boyfriend from the company I just bought. And when I walked into our family's Thanksgiving dinner and announced what I'd done, the look on her face was worth every penny I'd spent. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The mountain air in Boulder always smelled like pine needles and possibility. That's what I remember most about the summer of 2020, back when I still believed that family meant loyalty and love meant forever. I was 25 then, working as a marketing director for a tech startup in downtown Denver, living in a cozy apartment in Capitol Hill, with exposed brick walls and windows that caught the afternoon sun just right. Jake Thompson had been my world for 3 years. We met during my first week at University of Colorado Boulder, where he was studying business and I was pursuing my marketing degree with dreams of launching my own agency someday. Jake was the kind of guy who remembered your coffee order after the second date, who would drive 40 minutes in a snowstorm just to bring you soup when you were sick, who talked about our future like it was already written in stone. He had this way of making everything feel steady, secure. When my parents worried about my career choices, Jake defended my ambitions. When I doubted myself during those brutal late-night study sessions, he'd sit beside me with his own textbooks, working quietly until I was ready to talk through whatever was troubling me. By our 3rd year together, he'd become woven into every part of my life so seamlessly that I couldn't imagine existence without him. Sophia was different from me in every way that mattered. Where I was methodical and planned everything down to the smallest detail, she was spontaneous and magnetic. She could walk into any room and immediately become its center of gravity, drawing people toward her with an effortless charm that I'd always envied from a distance. 2 years younger than me, she dropped out of college after freshman year to pursue what she called influencer entrepreneurship, building a social media following by posting lifestyle content and partnering with brands for sponsored posts. My parents worried about her constantly. Mom would shake her head whenever Sophia posted another photo from some expensive restaurant or designer boutique, wondering aloud how she afforded such luxuries on her inconsistent income. Dad, more traditional in his thinking, wanted both his daughters to have stable careers with benefits and retirement plans. But Sophia laughed off their concerns, insisting she was building something bigger than any conventional job could offer. Despite our differences, we'd always been close. Sophia was the one who helped me pick out my outfit for my first date with Jake, who stayed up all night helping me rehearse my presentation for my first big client meeting, who flew to Denver just to celebrate when I got promoted to marketing director. She was my sister, my friend, and the person I trusted most in the world after Jake himself. The summer of 2020 changed everything, though. We couldn't have known it at the time. COVID had turned the world upside down, and our family was clinging to whatever normalcy we could create. Abuelo Luis, my grandfather, was turning 75 in July, and despite all the restrictions and health concerns, Mom insisted we needed to celebrate properly. It would be a small gathering, just immediate family, held in the backyard of my parents' house in Boulder, where social distancing would be easier to maintain. I remember being excited about the party, not just for Abuelo's sake, but because it meant Jake would finally meet my extended family. We'd been talking more seriously about our future lately, about moving in together officially instead of Jake just spending most nights at my apartment anyway, about what we wanted from life and how we might build it together. I had this secret hope that maybe the party would be the perfect opportunity for him to see how he fit into my family, how naturally he belonged with all of us. Sophia arrived at my parents' house 2 days before the party, claiming she wanted to help with preparations but mostly just taking over Mom's kitchen to film content for her Instagram stories. She documented every aspect of the party planning process, from the selection of decorations to the marinating of the carne asada, turning Abuelo's birthday into what she called authentic family content for her followers. Jake drove up from Denver the morning of the party, bringing flowers for Mom and a bottle of expensive tequila for Abuelo, gifts I'd helped him choose but that Sophia immediately praised as so thoughtful and perfectly chosen. I watched her compliment his shirt, laugh at his jokes about the Denver traffic, and offer to show him around the backyard while I helped Dad set up the sound system for Abuelo's favorite mariachi music. There were small moments throughout that day that felt slightly off, like notes played just sharp enough to make you wince. The way Sophia touched Jake's arm when she laughed at something he said. How she positioned herself next to him in every group photo, claiming she wanted to make sure the lighting was good for everyone. The inside jokes they seemed to develop over the course of just a few hours. References to conversations I wasn't part of and hadn't even realized they'd had. But I pushed down the uneasiness, telling myself I was being paranoid and possessive. Sophia was naturally flirtatious with everyone. It was part of her personality, not a targeted campaign. Jake was just being polite and friendly to my family, which was exactly what I wanted him to do. I was reading too much into innocent interactions because I was nervous about how the day would go, not because anything was actually wrong. The party itself was beautiful. Mom had strung lights across the back patio, and Dad had set up tables under the old cottonwood tree where Abuelo could hold court and tell stories about his childhood in Mexico to anyone willing to listen. The smell of grilled meat mixed with the scent of Mom's homemade salsa verde, and everyone was laughing and talking in that comfortable blend of English and Spanish that marked all our family gatherings. Jake seemed to love it all. He listened intently to Abuelo's stories, complimented Mom's cooking with genuine enthusiasm, and even attempted to dance when the mariachi music started playing, making everyone laugh with his earnest but clumsy efforts. I felt proud watching him navigate my family's dynamics, grateful for how naturally he seemed to fit into the everyone to take home. It was a family tradition that no one left a Rodriguez party empty-handed, and Mom had been planning the distribution of leftovers almost as carefully as she'd planned the party itself. The house felt quiet after the noise and energy of the backyard celebration. Most of the guests had moved outside to the patio, where Abuelo was holding court with his post-dinner stories, leaving the kitchen and living room temporarily empty. I was wrapping enchiladas in aluminum foil when I realized I hadn't seen Jake or Sophia for the past 20 minutes or so. I wandered through the house looking for them, checking the front porch where people sometimes went to escape the crowd, glancing into Dad's study where the quieter family members occasionally retreated for a break from the festivities. The house seemed empty except for the distant sound of laughter and music from the backyard. That's when I heard voices coming from the basement. My parents had finished the basement years ago, turning it into a family room with a big sectional couch and a television where we used to watch movies during family visits. It was Sophia's favorite spot in the house because it was quiet and had good lighting for her photos and videos. I started down the stairs, planning to let them know that Mom was ready to distribute leftovers and we should probably start thinking about saying our goodbyes. But halfway down the steps, I heard Sophia's laugh, breathy and intimate in a way that made my stomach clench with sudden dread. I stopped moving, frozen on the staircase as their voices became clearer. Sophia was saying something about how funny Jake was, how she'd never realized how much they had in common. Jake's voice was lower, harder to make out, but there was something in his tone that I'd never heard when he talked to me, something warm and conspiratorial. I took another step down, and then I could see them. They were sitting on the sectional, closer together than casual conversation required. Sophia's hand was resting on Jake's knee, and his arm was stretched along the back of the couch behind her shoulders. They were leaning toward each other, speaking in whispers despite being alone in the room. But it was the way they looked at each other that stopped my heart. There was an electricity between them, a magnetic pull that was impossible to misinterpret. This wasn't innocent flirtation or friendly conversation. This was attraction, mutual and undeniable, and it was happening right in front of me in my family's basement while my grandfather's birthday party continued upstairs. I watched Jake reach up to tuck a strand of Sophia's hair behind her ear, a gesture so gentle and intimate that it felt like a physical blow to my chest. Sophia leaned into his touch, her eyes closing for just a moment, and when she opened them again, she was looking at Jake like he was the answer to a question she'd been asking her whole life. They still hadn't seen me standing on the stairs, frozen in disbelief and growing horror. Part of me wanted to run back upstairs and pretend I'd never witnessed this moment, to preserve the illusion that my boyfriend and my sister were not falling in love right under my nose. But a larger part of me needed to see how far this betrayal would go, needed to understand exactly what I was losing. Sophia said something that made Jake laugh, and then she was moving closer to him on the couch, her hand sliding up from his knee to rest against his chest. Jake's hand found her waist, pulling her closer, and I watched in frozen horror as they leaned toward each other, the space between them disappearing until their lips met in a kiss that looked like it had been building for hours, days, maybe weeks. The kiss lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like watching my entire life crumble in slow motion. When they broke apart, Sophia rested her forehead against Jake's, and they smiled at each other with the kind of joy and discovery that should have been reserved for me and Jake, not for my sister and the man I'd been planning to build a future with. That's when Sophia looked up and saw me standing on the stairs. Her eyes widened, but she didn't pull away from Jake immediately. For a moment, the three of us just stared at each other in a tableau of betrayal and discovery that would replay in my mind for years to come. Jake followed Sophia's gaze and saw me there, and his face went through a series of expressions so quickly I could barely track them. Surprise, guilt, defiance, and finally, a kind of resigned acceptance, as if he'd been caught doing something he knew was wrong but couldn't bring himself to regret. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but no words came out. What do you say when you discover that the two people you love most in the world have been lying to you, betraying you, falling in love behind your back? What words exist for that kind of devastation? So instead of speaking, I turned around and walked back up the stairs, my legs feeling disconnected from my body, my chest tight with the effort of breathing normally. I could hear them calling my name behind me, Sophia's voice high and panicked, Jake's deeper and filled with something that might have been regret. I made it through the kitchen and out the back door before either of them caught up with me, stepping into the warm summer evening where my family was still celebrating Abuelo's birthday, still laughing and talking, and existing in a world where my life hadn't just imploded in the basement below their feet. Mom looked up as I approached, her smile fading when she saw my face. "Mija, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced myself to smile, to speak normally, to pretend that everything was fine even though I felt like I was drowning in plain sight. "I'm not feeling well," I managed to say. "I think I need to go home." The next few minutes passed in a blur of concerned family members and hurried goodbyes. I claimed a sudden migraine, promising to call Mom in the morning and apologizing to Abuelo for leaving his party early. Jake appeared at my side as I was gathering my purse and keys, trying to pull me aside for a private conversation, but I couldn't bear to look at him, couldn't stand to hear whatever explanation or justification he was preparing to offer. "Emma, please, let me explain," he said quietly, his hand reaching for my arm. I stepped away from his touch, finally meeting his eyes. "There's nothing to explain," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded when everything inside me was screaming. I saw what I saw. Sophia emerged from the house as I was walking toward my car, her face flushed, and her hair slightly messed from their encounter in the basement. She started toward me, but I held up a hand to stop her. "Don't," I said simply, "just don't." I drove back to Denver in a haze of shock, and preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Disbelief, my hands shaking on the steering wheel as I navigated the familiar mountain curves that had never felt so treacherous. By the time I reached my apartment, the reality of what had happened was beginning to settle in, and with it came a grief so overwhelming I could barely function. I sat in my car in the parking lot for nearly an hour, staring up at the windows of the apartment I shared unofficially with Jake, trying to figure out how to go inside and face the evidence of our life together. His clothes in my closet, his books on my shelves, his coffee mug in my sink from that morning when everything had still been normal and intact. When I finally went inside, I moved through the familiar space like a stranger, seeing everything through the lens of what I now knew. The photo of Jake and me at last year's company Christmas party, both of us smiling and happy and unaware that our relationship had an expiration date. The vacation itinerary for our planned trip to Costa Rica, printed out and stuck to the refrigerator with a magnet. The engagement ring I was convinced he was planning to give me soon, probably hidden somewhere in this very apartment. I didn't pack his things that night. I didn't call him or Sophia, didn't demand explanations or apologies or promises that it would never happen again. Instead, I sat on my couch with a cup of tea that went cold in my hands and tried to process the fact that my life had just completely changed direction without my permission or participation. The next morning brought a series of increasingly frantic phone calls and text messages from both Jake and Sophia, each of them desperate to explain, to apologize, to somehow minimize the magnitude of what I'd witnessed. I listened to their voicemails once each, just long enough to confirm that neither of them was denying what had happened, only trying to justify it or beg for forgiveness. Jake's message was full of apologies and claims that it had been a moment of weakness, that he loved me and wanted to work things out. Sophia's was more complicated, mixing genuine remorse with defensive explanations about how these things sometimes just happened, how love couldn't be controlled or predicted. I deleted all their messages without responding, and spent the day researching apartments I could afford on my own, determined to create a life that didn't include either of them. It was time to start over, to build something that belonged entirely to me and couldn't be taken away by betrayal or broken promises. Within a week, I had found a new apartment in the Highlands neighborhood, a converted warehouse space with concrete floors and floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded the room with natural light. It was smaller than what Jake and I had shared, but it was mine alone, and that mattered more than square footage. The lease was higher than I'd planned to spend, but my marketing director's salary could handle it, and I needed the financial independence to feel truly free from the wreckage of my previous life. Moving out of Capitol Hill meant leaving behind more than just an apartment. That neighborhood had been where Jake and I built our relationship, where we'd discovered our favorite coffee shops and restaurants, where we'd walked hand in hand through the weekend farmers markets dreaming about our future together. Every street corner held a memory. Every familiar business was a reminder of what I'd lost. The Highlands felt different, rougher around the edges but full of potential. Young professionals and artists were disbelief, my hands shaking on the steering wheel as I navigated the familiar mountain curves that had never felt so treacherous. By the time I reached my apartment, the reality of what had happened was beginning to settle in. And with it came a grief so overwhelming I could barely function. I sat in my car in the parking lot for nearly an hour, staring up at the windows of the apartment I shared unofficially with Jake, trying to figure out how to go inside and face the evidence of our life together. His clothes in my closet, his books on my shelves, his coffee mug in my sink from that morning when everything had still been normal and intact. When I finally went inside, I moved through the familiar space like a stranger, seeing everything through the lens of what I now knew. The photo of Jake and me at last year's company Christmas party, both of us smiling and happy and unaware that our relationship had an expiration date. The vacation itinerary for our planned trip to Costa Rica, printed out and stuck to the refrigerator with a magnet. The engagement ring I was convinced he was planning to give me soon, probably hidden somewhere in this very apartment. I didn't pack his things that night. I didn't call him or Sophia, didn't demand explanations or apologies or promises that it would never happen again. Instead, I sat on my couch with a cup of tea that went cold in my hands and tried to process the fact that my life had just completely changed direction without my permission or participation. The next morning brought a series of increasingly frantic phone calls and text messages from both Jake and Sophia, each of them desperate to explain, to apologize, to somehow minimize the magnitude of what I'd witnessed. I listened to their voicemails once each, just long enough to confirm that neither of them was denying what had happened, only trying to justify it or beg for forgiveness. Jake's message was full of apologies and claims that it had been a moment of weakness, that he loved me and wanted to work things out. Sophia's was more complicated, mixing genuine remorse with defensive explanations about how these things sometimes just happened, how love couldn't be controlled or predicted. I deleted all their messages without responding, and spent the day researching apartments I could afford on my own, determined to create a life that didn't include either of them. It was time to start over, to build something that belonged entirely to me and couldn't be taken away by betrayal or broken promises. Within a week, I had found a new apartment in the Highlands neighborhood, a converted warehouse space with concrete floors and floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded the room with natural light. It was smaller than what Jake and I had shared, but it was mine alone, and that mattered more than square footage. The lease was higher than I'd planned to spend, but my marketing director's salary could handle it, and I needed the financial independence to feel truly free from the wreckage of my previous life. Moving out of Capitol Hill meant leaving behind more than just an apartment. That neighborhood had been where Jake and I built our relationship, where we discovered our favorite coffee shops and restaurants, where we'd walked hand in hand through the weekend farmers markets dreaming about our future together. Every street corner held a memory, every familiar business was a reminder of what I'd lost. The Highlands felt different, rougher around the edges but full of potential. Young professionals and artists were generating impressive results, with several companies reporting significant increases in both followers and actual sales conversions. David noticed the success and began assigning me more high-profile clients, including a few that were considering leaving TechFlow for larger marketing firms. My work convinced them to stay, and my reputation within the company grew rapidly. I was invited to strategy meetings that had previously been limited to senior leadership, asked to present my ideas to potential new clients, and given increasing autonomy over the marketing department's direction. The professional recognition felt validating in a way that helped counteract the personal rejection I was still processing. Jake and Sophia might have decided I wasn't worth their loyalty, but my colleagues and clients clearly valued my contributions. I began to see that perhaps losing Jake wasn't the devastating career setback I'd initially feared. Maybe it was an opportunity to discover what I could accomplish when I wasn't splitting my emotional energy between work and relationship maintenance. My apartment in the Highlands became a sanctuary where I could process the changes happening in my life. The concrete floors and industrial fixtures created an atmosphere that felt modern and forward-looking, completely different from the cozy domesticity of my previous home. I bought plants that required minimal care, hung abstract artwork that reflected my mood rather than matching any particular color scheme, and created a home office space where I could work on freelance projects that interested me. The freelance work started almost by accident. One of TechFlow's clients mentioned that they were looking for additional marketing support beyond what our company could provide, and they asked if I knew anyone who might be available for part-time work. Instead of referring them to another agency, I offered to take on the project myself, working evenings and weekends to develop a comprehensive marketing plan for their business. The project went so well that the client referred me to 2 other businesses, and within a month, I had a small but growing freelance practice that was bringing in extra income while expanding my professional skills. I was careful to ensure that my freelance work didn't conflict with my responsibilities to TechFlow, but David was supportive of my outside projects, recognizing that they made me a more valuable employee. The extra money from freelancing allowed me to begin thinking about longer-term financial goals. I started researching investment opportunities, reading books about personal finance and wealth building, and meeting with financial advisors to understand my options. For the first time in my life, I was thinking seriously about building real wealth, rather than just earning enough to cover my expenses. This financial planning was motivated partly by practical considerations, but also by a growing desire for independence and security. The Betrayal by Jake and Sophia had taught me that I couldn't rely on other people for my emotional or financial well-being. I needed to build a life that was strong enough to withstand future challenges, successful enough to give me options and freedom. During this period of intense focus on work and financial planning, I maintained minimal contact with my family. Mom called regularly, trying to check on my well-being without directly addressing what had happened at Abuelo's party. She would ask about my new apartment, my work, whether I was eating properly and getting enough sleep. Her concern was genuine and loving, but I could tell she was struggling with how to navigate the situation between her daughters. Dad's approach was different. He would call occasionally with practical questions about my car insurance or tax documents, conversations that felt normal and uncomplicated because they didn't require us to address the emotional complexities of what Sophia had done. I appreciated his indirect way of showing care, his understanding that sometimes the best support is simply treating someone normally when their world has been turned upside down. Abuelo Luis was the only family member who addressed the situation directly. About a month after his birthday party, he called me on a Sunday evening when he knew I would be home. His voice was gentle but firm as he told me how proud he was of the way I was handling a difficult situation, how impressed he was with my strength and independence. Meha, he said, using the affectionate nickname that always made me feel connected to my childhood. Sometimes life teaches us lessons we never wanted to learn, but the strongest people use those lessons to build something better. I found myself crying during that conversation, not from sadness but from relief at having someone acknowledge what I was going through without trying to minimize it or rush me toward forgiveness. Abuelo understood that healing takes time, that some betrayals leave scars that need to be honored rather than ignored. The autumn months brought new challenges and opportunities at TechFlow. The company was preparing to launch a major new product, and David asked me to lead the marketing campaign. It was the biggest project I'd ever managed, with a budget that exceeded anything I'd worked with before, and the potential to significantly impact TechFlow's future growth. I assembled a team of designers, copywriters, and data analysts to support the campaign, and for the first time in my career, I was managing other people's work rather than just completing my own tasks. The responsibility was both exciting and terrifying, but I found that I enjoyed the strategic thinking required to coordinate multiple moving parts toward a common goal. The product launch campaign required extensive market research, competitive analysis, and consumer testing. I spent weeks developing personas for our target customers, analyzing their behavior patterns and preferences, and crafting messages that would resonate with their specific needs and concerns. The work was complex and demanding, but it engaged my mind in a way that left little room for dwelling on personal disappointments. As the launch date approached, I found myself working 12-hour days and weekends, fine-tuning every detail of the campaign. My team was equally committed, and we developed a collaborative energy that made even the most stressful moments feel manageable. I was discovering that I had real leadership abilities, that I could inspire other people to do their best work while maintaining high standards for the final product. The campaign launched in November, and the results exceeded everyone's expectations. Within the first week, we had generated more leads than our most optimistic projections, and the sales team was struggling to keep up with the volume of interested customers. Industry publications wrote articles about TechFlow's innovative marketing approach, and several competitors began copying elements of our strategy. David promoted me to Senior Marketing Director in December, with a salary increase that reflected my expanded responsibilities and the value I was bringing to the company. The promotion came with stock options and a seat on TechFlow's leadership team, making me one of the youngest senior executives in the company's history. The professional success felt surreal after the personal devastation of the summer. 6 months earlier, I had been focused primarily on my relationship with Jake, treating my career as something important but secondary to our shared future plans. Now I was building something that belonged entirely to me, discovering capabilities I hadn't known I possessed, and creating a professional identity that no one could take away from me. My new position required me to travel occasionally for conferences and client meetings, and I found that I loved the combination of professional networking and exploring new cities. I attended marketing conferences in San Francisco and Austin, presented TechFlow's case studies to industry groups, and began building a professional network that extended far beyond Denver. During one conference in Phoenix, I met Marcus Chen, a partner at a private equity firm that specialized in technology companies. Marcus was leading a panel discussion about marketing strategies for scaling startups, and his presentation was both insightful and entertaining. After his talk, I approached him to ask a question about metrics and measurement, and we ended up having a lengthy conversation about the challenges of marketing in rapidly changing industries. Marcus was different from any man I'd ever met professionally. He was clearly brilliant and successful, but he wore his accomplishments lightly, asking as many questions as he answered, and genuinely interested in perspectives that differed from his own. He had an easy confidence that came from genuine competence rather than insecurity or ego, and he treated everyone he encountered with the same level of respect and attention. We exchanged business cards and continued our conversation over dinner, talking about everything from marketing psychology to Denver's restaurant scene to our respective career journeys. Marcus had grown up in Seattle, earned his MBA from Stanford, and spent several years at major consulting firms before joining the private equity world. He was passionate about identifying companies with strong potential and helping them grow through strategic investments and operational improvements. The conversation felt natural and intellectually stimulating in a way that reminded me how much I missed engaging with someone as an equal. Jake had been supportive of my career, but he'd never really understood the strategic aspects of marketing or shared my enthusiasm for business development. Marcus not only understood what I did, but could contribute insights that made me think about my work in new ways. When I returned to Denver, Marcus and I began corresponding regularly via email, sharing articles and ideas related to our respective industries. He was working on evaluating several marketing technology companies for potential investments, and he appreciated my perspective as someone who used those tools professionally. I found his strategic approach to business evaluation fascinating, particularly his ability to see patterns and opportunities that weren't immediately obvious. The email correspondence gradually evolved into phone calls, and I began looking forward to our conversations in a way that had nothing to do with professional networking. Marcus had a dry sense of humor that made me laugh, and he was genuinely interested in my thoughts and opinions about everything from industry trends, to books we'd both read, to observations about cities we'd visited. I was careful not to think of our growing friendship as anything romantic. The pain from Jake's betrayal was still too fresh, and I wasn't ready to trust anyone with my heart again. But I found myself appreciating Marcus's consistency, his reliability in following through on commitments, and his respectful approach to our professional relationship. He never pushed for personal information or tried to move our interactions beyond the boundaries I had established. Winter in Denver brought heavy snowfall and shorter days, but I found myself feeling more optimistic than I had in months. My work continued to go well, with several major clients expanding their contracts with TechFlow based on the success of campaigns I had developed. I was earning more money than ever before, living in a home I loved, and building a professional reputation that opened new doors and opportunities regularly. The freelance work had grown into a substantial side business, and I began considering whether it might eventually become my primary focus. Several clients had suggested that I start my own marketing agency, offering to be founding customers if I decided to make the transition from employee to entrepreneur. The idea was both exciting and terrifying, but I was no longer the person who chose security over possibility. My relationship with my parents had settled into a new normal that avoided discussing Sophia or Jake directly, but maintained the loving connection that had always been the foundation of our family. Mom continued to call weekly, and Dad had started sending me articles about business and investment strategies that he found interesting. Their support felt different than it had before, less focused on my romantic relationships and more appreciative of my professional accomplishments. The one family relationship that remained complicated was with Sophia herself. She had tried calling and texting numerous times during the first few months after Abuelo's party, but I had maintained my silence. I wasn't angry anymore, exactly, but I wasn't ready to pretend that our relationship could return to what it had been before. Trust, once broken, required more than apologies to repair. I heard updates about Sophia indirectly through Mom's phone calls. Apparently, her relationship with Jake had become official sometime in the fall, and they were living together in his apartment in downtown Denver. Mom was careful not to share too many details, but I gathered that Sophia's social media following had grown significantly, possibly boosted by the drama and speculation surrounding our family situation. The information about Sophia and Jake didn't hurt as much as I had expected it to. The sharp pain of betrayal had mellowed into something more like disappointment, a sadness for what we had all lost rather than anger about what they had gained. I was building a life that felt meaningful and successful, and their happiness or lack thereof no longer felt like a reflection on my own worth. As winter turned towards spring, I began planning a vacation to celebrate my first year of independence. I had never traveled alone before, having always coordinated trips with Jake or family members, but the idea of exploring a new place entirely on my own terms felt appealing. I researched destinations across Europe, ultimately deciding on a 2-week trip to Italy that would combine art, history, food, and the kind of adventure that I had never been brave enough to pursue when my life was more predictable. The planning process was another exercise in self-discovery. I could choose my itinerary based entirely on my own interests, book accommodations that reflected my preferences rather than compromises, and structure my days around activities that excited me personally. For the first time in years, I was thinking about what I wanted rather than what would work for a couple or a group. The Italy trip was scheduled for April, which gave me several months to improve my Italian language skills and research the cities I planned to visit. I signed up for conversation classes at the local community college, downloaded language learning apps, and began reading travel memoirs and guidebooks that would help me make the most of my time abroad. Marcus had mentioned during one of our phone calls that he had spent a semester studying in Florence during business school, and he offered to share recommendations for restaurants and museums that had made lasting impressions on him. His suggestions reflected the same thoughtful approach he brought to everything else, focused on authentic experiences rather than tourist attractions. As my departure date approached, I felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness that reminded me why travel had always appealed to me theoretically, but intimidated me practically. This trip represented more than just a vacation. It was a declaration of independence, a statement that I was capable of creating meaningful experiences without needing someone else to validate or share them. The night before my flight to Rome, I sat in my apartment looking out at the Denver skyline and reflecting on how dramatically my life had changed in less than a year. 12 months earlier, I had been planning a future with Jake, working in a job that felt stable but not particularly challenging, and defining myself primarily through my relationships with other people. Now I was a senior executive at a growing company, building a successful freelance business, planning international solo travel, and discovering capabilities and interests I hadn't known I possessed. The person who had been devastated by betrayal at Abuelo's birthday party felt like a younger, more naive version of myself, someone I remembered fondly but couldn't imagine being again. The pain of losing Jake and Sophia had been real and significant, but it had also cleared space in my life for growth and discovery that might never have happened if I had remained comfortable in my previous circumstances. I was learning that some losses, even devastating ones, can become opportunities if you're willing to do the difficult work of rebuilding rather than simply recovering. Italy changed everything about how I saw myself and what I believed I was capable of achieving. The 2 weeks I spent wandering through Rome, Florence, and Venice taught me that I could navigate unfamiliar places with confidence, connect with strangers despite language barriers, and find joy in experiences that belonged entirely to me. I returned to Denver with a new sense of possibility that extended far beyond travel adventures. The confidence I had gained from solo travel began influencing every aspect of my professional life. When David Martinez announced that TechFlow was considering expanding into international markets, I volunteered to lead the research project that would determine which countries offered the best opportunities for our software solutions. My recent experience navigating Italy gave me insights into cultural differences and communication challenges that proved invaluable as I developed market entry strategies for European expansion. The international project required me to work closely with TechFlow's executive team, including the chief financial officer and head of business development. These conversations exposed me to aspects of business strategy that went far beyond marketing, from financial modeling to regulatory compliance to partnership development. I found myself fascinated by the complexity of scaling a business across multiple markets and the strategic thinking required to make expansion profitable rather than just possible. Marcus Chen had been right when he suggested that understanding business operations from multiple perspectives would make me a more effective marketing leader. His emails from various cities where his private equity firm was evaluating potential investments gave me glimpses into how experienced business leaders analyzed companies, identified growth opportunities, and developed strategies for sustainable expansion. Our correspondence had evolved beyond professional networking into something that felt like genuine friendship. Marcus had a way of asking questions that challenged my assumptions without making me feel defensive, and he shared insights from his work that helped me think more strategically about my own career development. When he mentioned that his firm was planning to evaluate several marketing technology companies in the Denver area, I offered to provide local market insights that might be useful for their research. The offer led to my first formal consulting engagement with Marcus's firm, Rodriguez Strategic Partners. They needed someone with deep knowledge of the Denver technology ecosystem to help them understand competitive dynamics and market positioning for companies they were considering. The project would require me to research dozens of local businesses, analyze their marketing strategies, and provide detailed reports on their strengths and potential vulnerabilities. I approached the consulting work with the same intensity I had brought to every professional challenge since rebuilding my life. The research required me to network extensively within Denver's business community, attending industry events and scheduling informational interviews with executives at companies across the technology sector. These conversations gave me a comprehensive understanding of how different businesses were positioning themselves and what challenges they faced in scaling their operations. One company that came up repeatedly in my research was TechFlow Solutions itself. Several people I interviewed mentioned TechFlow as an example of a local business that had grown rapidly while maintaining strong client relationships and innovative marketing approaches. The external validation of my employer's success felt gratifying, but it also made me realize how much I had contributed to that reputation through my campaigns and strategic initiatives. The consulting project for Rodriguez Strategic Partners took 3 months to complete, and the final report I delivered exceeded their expectations in both scope and insight. Marcus called me personally to discuss my findings, and during that conversation, he mentioned that his firm was always looking for talented professionals who understood both marketing strategy and business operations. He suggested that I might consider joining Rodriguez Strategic Partners as a full-time partner focused on marketing and technology investments. The opportunity was tempting but premature. I loved my work at TechFlow and felt loyal to David Martinez, who had supported my professional development and given me opportunities to lead major projects. But Marcus's suggestion planted a seed that began growing in my mind as I considered what I wanted from my career in the long term. My freelance marketing practice continued expanding throughout the spring and summer, with new clients coming primarily through referrals from satisfied customers. I was now earning almost as much from freelance work as from my TechFlow salary, and several clients had begun asking whether I would consider taking on larger projects that would require me to hire additional team members. The question of whether to start my own marketing agency became more pressing as my freelance income grew. I began researching what would be required to establish a formal business entity, from legal structure to insurance requirements to tax implications. The financial planning I had been doing since moving to the Highlands apartment had given me enough savings to support myself during the transition period, and my network of professional contacts would provide a solid foundation for client acquisition. During a particularly successful month when my freelance income exceeded my TechFlow salary for the first time, I decided to have a conversation with David Martinez about my future plans. I respected him too much to leave TechFlow without giving him adequate notice and the opportunity to plan for my departure. The conversation was more difficult than I had anticipated, partly because David made a counteroffer that would have doubled my current salary and given me equity in TechFlow. His offer was generous and demonstrated how much value TechFlow placed on my contributions, but it also confirmed that I had outgrown what the company could provide in terms of challenge and autonomy. I wanted to build something of my own, to test my abilities as an entrepreneur, rather than just an employee, and to create a business that reflected my vision for how marketing could help companies grow sustainably. I gave TechFlow 3 months' notice, which allowed me to complete my current projects and help train my replacement. David was disappointed but understanding, and he made it clear that TechFlow would be happy to work with my new agency as a client. Several of my colleagues expressed interest in joining my agency eventually, which gave me confidence that I would be able to build a strong team when the time came to expand. Rodriguez Marketing Solutions officially launched in September, exactly 1 year after I had been promoted to Senior Marketing Director at TechFlow. The timing felt symbolically important, marking a complete cycle from devastating personal loss to professional independence and entrepreneurship. I celebrated the launch with a small dinner party at my Highlands apartment, inviting the friends and mentors who had supported my journey toward business ownership. Marcus Chen flew to Denver for the launch party, bringing champagne and a leather-bound notebook engraved with my new company logo. His presence at the celebration felt significant, not just because of our growing friendship, but because he represented the kind of strategic thinking and business expertise that I hoped to develop as an entrepreneur. We spent most of the evening discussing my plans for growing the agency and his insights into what made marketing services businesses successful over the long term. The first few months of running Rodriguez Marketing Solutions were simultaneously exhilarating and terrifying. I was responsible for every aspect of the business, from client acquisition to project management to financial planning. The freedom to make decisions without committee approval or corporate bureaucracy was liberating, but the responsibility for every outcome was sometimes overwhelming. My client base grew steadily through the fall, helped by referrals from my freelance work and recommendations from former colleagues at TechFlow. I was able to maintain the quality standards that had built my reputation, while expanding the scope of services I could offer. By November, I was earning more per month than I had ever made as an employee, and I began considering when to hire my first full-time team member. The success of my agency attracted attention within Denver's business community, and I was invited to speak at several conferences about entrepreneurship and marketing strategy. These speaking engagements led to additional client opportunities and partnership possibilities with other local businesses. I began to see how building a reputation as a thought leader could create marketing opportunities for my own company, while helping me develop expertise that would benefit my clients. During one particularly busy week in December, I received a call from Marcus Chen with an unexpected proposition. Rodriguez Strategic Partners was planning to acquire a mid-sized technology company in Denver, and they needed someone with local market knowledge to help with due diligence and post-acquisition marketing strategy. The project would pay more than I typically earned from a single client, and it would give me experience with business acquisitions that could be valuable for my own company's future growth. The target company was one I knew well from my research the previous year, TechFlow Solutions. David Martinez had decided to sell the company he had built in order to focus on a new startup venture, and Rodriguez Strategic Partners had emerged as the leading bidder after a competitive process. Marcus wanted me to evaluate TechFlow's marketing assets and develop a plan for maintaining client relationships during the ownership transition. Working on the TechFlow acquisition felt surreal, given my history with the company and my personal relationship with Marcus. I was careful to maintain professional boundaries and disclose any potential conflicts of interest, but the project gave me insights into how private equity firms evaluated businesses and created value through operational improvements and strategic investments. The acquisition process took several months to complete, during which I worked closely with Rodriguez Strategic Partners' investment team to understand TechFlow's strengths and opportunities for growth. The experience taught me about financial modeling, competitive analysis, and strategic planning at a level of sophistication that I had never encountered before. I began to understand why Marcus found business acquisitions intellectually stimulating and financially rewarding. When the TechFlow acquisition closed in March, Rodriguez Strategic Partners offered me a position as a partner focused on marketing and technology investments. The role would allow me to maintain my marketing agency while also participating in their investment activities, providing expertise on marketing strategy and helping portfolio companies grow their customer bases. The compensation structure included both salary and equity participation that could potentially be more lucrative than running my agency alone. I accepted the partnership offer after negotiating terms that would allow me to continue operating Rodriguez Marketing Solutions as a subsidiary business. The arrangement gave me the best of both worlds, the security and resources of an established private equity firm, combined with the autonomy and entrepreneurial satisfaction of running my own marketing business. My new role at Rodriguez Strategic Partners required me to travel frequently, evaluating potential investments and working with portfolio companies across the Western United States. I discovered that I enjoyed the variety and intellectual challenge of analyzing different businesses, understanding their competitive positions, and developing strategies for sustainable growth. Each company presented unique challenges that required creative problem-solving and strategic thinking. One particularly interesting project involved evaluating a software company in Austin that had developed innovative solutions for small business management but was struggling with customer acquisition and retention. The company's technology was superior to its competitors, but their marketing approach was unfocused and ineffective. I worked with their leadership team to develop a comprehensive marketing strategy that resulted in a 40% increase in new customer acquisitions within 6 months. The success of projects like the Austin Software Company enhanced my reputation within the private equity community and led to additional opportunities to work with companies that needed marketing expertise. I began to see a pattern in the challenges faced by technology companies. Many had excellent products but lacked the marketing sophistication needed to scale their customer bases effectively. This observation led to an idea that would eventually transform my career trajectory. What if I could create an investment firm that specialized in acquiring technology companies with strong products but weak marketing, then use my expertise to dramatically improve their customer acquisition and revenue growth? The approach would combine my marketing skills with the financial engineering capabilities I was learning at Rodriguez Strategic Partners. I began developing a business plan for this specialized investment strategy, researching potential target companies and modeling the financial returns that might be possible through marketing-focused operational improvements. The concept was ambitious and would require significant capital to implement, but I believed it could be highly successful if executed properly. Marcus Chen was intrigued by my idea when I presented it to him during one of our regular strategy discussions. He had observed the value I was creating for Rodriguez Strategic Partners' portfolio companies and recognized that marketing expertise was often the missing piece that prevented good technology companies from achieving their full potential. He suggested that we explore whether my specialized approach could be implemented as a new fund within Rodriguez Strategic Partners' existing structure. The possibility of launching my own investment fund was exciting but daunting. It would require me to raise capital from institutional investors, build a team of professionals with complementary skills, and take responsibility for generating returns that would satisfy our limited partners. The stakes would be higher than anything I had attempted before, but the potential rewards were correspondingly significant. As I researched the fund formation process, I began to understand how much my life had changed since that devastating night at Abuelo's birthday party. I had evolved from someone whose identity was primarily defined by her relationships to someone who was building substantial business assets and considering launching an investment fund. The betrayal that had initially felt like the end of my world had actually been the beginning of a journey toward independence and entrepreneurship that I might never have undertaken if my life had remained comfortable and predictable. My relationship with Marcus had also evolved during our months of working together at Rodriguez Strategic Partners. What had begun as professional networking had developed into a deep friendship built on mutual respect and shared intellectual interests. We spent long hours discussing business strategy, debating investment opportunities, and challenging each other's assumptions about markets and competitive dynamics. There was an ease in our interactions that reminded me of the best aspects of my relationship with Jake, but without the underlying tension and compromise that had characterized that connection. Marcus appreciated my analytical abilities and strategic thinking, while I valued his experience and wisdom about business development. We functioned as intellectual equals in a way that felt both comfortable and stimulating. I was careful not to interpret our professional partnership as anything romantic, partly because of my lingering wariness about workplace relationships, and partly because I wasn't ready to risk the friendship we had built. But I found myself looking forward to our conversations and feeling energized by the collaborative aspects of our work together. The fund formation process required extensive planning and relationship building with potential investors. I spent months developing financial projections, researching target markets, and preparing presentation materials that would convince institutional investors to commit capital to my specialized investment strategy. The work was challenging but fascinating, requiring me to synthesize everything I had learned about marketing, business operations, and financial analysis. During this planning period, I maintained minimal contact with my family beyond the weekly phone calls with Mom and occasional conversations with Abuelo Luis. I wasn't hiding my professional success, but I also wasn't actively sharing details about my business development or investment activities. The focus and intensity required to build my investment firm left little mental space for processing family dynamics or addressing unresolved relationships. I heard through Mom that Sophia and Jake were engaged and planning a wedding for the following summer. The news generated less emotional reaction than I had expected. Their relationship felt like part of a previous life that no longer had direct relevance to my current circumstances. I was grateful that their engagement announcement didn't trigger the pain and anger that would have overwhelmed me 2 years earlier. My emotional distance from Sophia and Jake's relationship was partly the result of time and healing, but it was also a reflection of how completely my priorities and self-perception had changed. The person who had been devastated by their betrayal had been someone whose happiness depended heavily on external relationships and validation. The person I had become was building something substantial and meaningful that belonged entirely to me. As autumn approached and my fund formation efforts gained momentum, I began to consider what kind of company might serve as the perfect inaugural investment for my new fund. I wanted to find a technology business with strong fundamentals, but marketing challenges that my expertise could address effectively. The company would need to be large enough to generate meaningful returns, but small enough that my involvement could make a significant operational impact. That's when I learned that TechFlow Solutions, despite its recent acquisition by Rodriguez Strategic Partners, was considering divesting one of its subsidiary companies that had never quite found its market positioning. The subsidiary, called Business Connect, had developed excellent customer relationship management software, but had struggled with customer acquisition since its launch 3 years earlier. Business Connect employed nearly 50 people, including several former colleagues from my TechFlow days, and generated annual revenue of approximately $8 million. The business was profitable but not growing, which made it an ideal candidate for the marketing-focused investment approach I wanted to implement. More importantly, Business Connect was the company where Jake Thompson had been promoted to regional sales director after David Martinez sold TechFlow to Rodriguez Strategic Partners. Jake's sales team was responsible for customer acquisition, which meant that any marketing improvements I implemented would directly impact his performance and potentially his employment security. The opportunity to acquire Business Connect represented more than just a potential investment. It was a chance to demonstrate the value of my specialized approach while potentially affecting the professional future of the man who had betrayed me 4 years earlier. The irony was not lost on me that Jake might soon be working for a company I owned, reporting on results that my marketing strategies had generated. I prepared a comprehensive analysis of Business Connect's potential, including detailed financial projections that showed how marketing improvements could double or triple the company's revenue within 2 years. The analysis impressed the team at Rodriguez Strategic Partners and attracted interest from several institutional investors who were considering commitments to my new fund. As negotiations for the Business Connect acquisition progressed through the winter, I found myself thinking about the journey that had brought me to this point. 4 years earlier, I had been a marketing director whose biggest professional challenge was developing campaigns for other people's companies. Now I was preparing to acquire and operate a business that could serve as the foundation for a significant investment enterprise. The transformation had required me to develop capabilities I hadn't known I possessed, from financial analysis to strategic planning to investor relations. But perhaps more importantly, it had required me to rebuild my self-confidence after a betrayal that had temporarily shattered my faith in my own judgment about people and relationships. The Business Connect acquisition would close in early spring, just before Sophia and Jake's wedding, which created an interesting symmetry between their personal milestone and my professional achievement. They would be celebrating their union while I was launching an investment fund that could potentially generate wealth beyond anything I had previously imagined possible. I had no interest in attending their wedding or disrupting their celebration, but I was looking forward to the moment when Jake would learn that his new boss was the woman whose heart he had broken in his previous employer's basement 4 years earlier. The thought of his reaction brought me a satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with justice, and the sweet vindication that comes from building something meaningful from the wreckage of devastating loss. The Business Connect acquisition closed on a crisp Thursday morning in March, exactly 4 years and 8 months after I had discovered Jake and Sophia in my parents' basement. I signed the final papers in the conference room of Rodriguez Strategic Partners, surrounded by lawyers and financial advisors who had worked for months to structure the deal. The company that employed Jake Thompson as regional sales director now belonged to me, though he wouldn't learn that fact for several more weeks. My new investment fund, Rodriguez Capital Ventures, had successfully raised $28 million from institutional investors who believed in my strategy of acquiring technology companies with marketing challenges. Business Connect was our inaugural acquisition, purchased for $12.2 million, with plans to implement comprehensive marketing improvements that would triple its revenue within 18 months. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on anyone who knew my history. Marcus Chen had smiled knowingly when I explained why Business Connect was the perfect target for our first investment, understanding that this acquisition represented both sound business strategy and a form of poetic justice that had taken years to orchestrate. But he also knew that my decision was based primarily on financial analysis rather than personal vendetta. Business Connect genuinely offered the best opportunity to demonstrate our specialized approach. I spent the first month after the acquisition conducting detailed assessments of Business Connect's operations, customer base, and market positioning. The company's customer relationship management software was technically superior to most competitors, but their marketing messaging was confusing, and their sales processes were inefficient. Jake's sales team was working with outdated materials and targeting the wrong customer segments, which explained their consistently disappointing results. The operational review required me to meet with department heads and key employees throughout the company, including several people who remembered me from my TechFlow days. These conversations were professional but occasionally awkward, as former colleagues tried to reconcile their memories of me as a marketing director with my new role as their company's owner. Most seemed impressed by my career trajectory, though I could sense some curiosity about how I had accumulated the resources to purchase their employer. Jake was in San Francisco for a client conference during my first 2 weeks of operational reviews, which gave me time to understand his team's challenges without the complication of face-to-face interaction. His sales reports showed consistent effort but disappointing results, a pattern that reflected the company's broader marketing problems rather than any particular deficiency in his personal performance. When Jake returned from San Francisco, I scheduled a meeting with him to discuss his team's customer acquisition strategies and performance metrics. I chose to hold the meeting in Business Connect's main conference room, a neutral space that would emphasize the professional nature of our interaction while avoiding any suggestion of personal confrontation. I arrived at the conference room 15 minutes early, reviewing my notes and preparing for what would undoubtedly be one of the most surreal conversations of my life. 4 years earlier, Jake Thompson had been the center of my emotional universe, the person I had planned to build a future with until he chose my sister instead. Now he was an employee whose performance I would evaluate, and whose continued employment depended on his ability to contribute to my company's success. Jake entered the conference room at exactly 2 o'clock, dressed in the navy suit he had always favored for important meetings. He looked older than I remembered, with lines around his eyes that suggested stress or disappointment, and his confident demeanor seemed more forced than it had in our college days. When he saw me sitting at the head of the conference table, his face went through a series of expressions that would have been comical if the situation hadn't been so loaded with history. "Emma," he said after a long pause, his voice carefully neutral. "I wasn't expecting. Nobody told me that you were the new owner." I finished for him, gesturing toward the chair across from me. "Please, sit down. We have a lot to discuss about your team's performance and the changes we'll be implementing over the next several months." The meeting lasted 90 minutes and covered everything from customer segmentation to sales pipeline management to performance metrics. I maintained a completely professional tone throughout our conversation, treating Jake exactly as I would treat any other department head whose results needed improvement. I presented detailed analysis of his team's activities, identified specific areas where their approach was limiting success, and outlined the marketing support they would receive to improve their conversion rates. Jake was clearly struggling to reconcile the woman sitting across from him with his memories of our relationship, but he managed to respond appropriately to my questions and suggestions. His knowledge of the customer base was thorough, and his insights into client needs were valuable for developing our new marketing strategies. Whatever personal feelings complicated our interaction, he was professional enough to focus on the business discussion at hand. Toward the end of the meeting, I outlined the performance expectations that would apply to his team over the next quarter. The targets were ambitious, but achievable with proper marketing support, and I made it clear that meeting these goals would result in substantial bonuses for his entire sales team. I also explained that failure to meet the targets would necessitate restructuring the sales department, which could affect personnel decisions. "I understand," Jake said when I finished explaining the new expectations. "Can I ask you something, though? Off the record?" I considered his request for a moment before nodding. "What do you want to know?" "Are you doing this because of what happened between us? Because if you are, I want you to know that I understand why you'd be angry, and I don't expect any special treatment. But my team doesn't deserve to suffer because of my personal mistakes." His question was fair, and I appreciated that his first concern was for his employees rather than his own job security. "Jake, I bought this company because it represents an excellent investment opportunity. Your team's performance will be evaluated based on business metrics, not personal history. If you can deliver the results we need, you'll be rewarded accordingly. If you can't, we'll make the necessary changes to ensure this company succeeds." The relief on his face was genuine, though I could see that he was still processing the strange dynamics of our new professional relationship. "Thank you for being direct about that. I know this situation is unusual." "It is," I agreed, "but I'm not interested in relitigating the past. I'm focused on building value for my investors and creating opportunities for employees who contribute to that goal. Your job is to help your team exceed their targets. My job is to provide the resources and strategy that make that possible." Over the following weeks, I implemented comprehensive changes to Business Connect's marketing approach, from rebranding the company's visual identity to restructuring their website to launching targeted advertising campaigns that reached better qualified prospects. The new marketing materials provided Jake's sales team with tools that were dramatically more effective than anything they had used previously, and their conversion rates began improving almost immediately. I also restructured the sales process itself, implementing customer relationship management protocols that helped Jake's team track prospects more efficiently and follow up more systematically. The changes required additional training and adjustment periods, but the results were evident within the first month. Qualified leads increased by 60%, and the sales team was closing deals at a much higher rate. Jake proved to be an effective implementer of the new systems, and his team responded well to the improved processes and materials. Their performance exceeded the ambitious targets I had set for the first quarter, earning bonuses that were larger than any they had received in the company's history. Jake himself earned a performance bonus that was more than his previous annual salary increase, and I could see that the financial recognition was meaningful for him. The success of Business Connect's transformation attracted attention within Denver's business community and among the investors in Rodriguez Capital Ventures. The company's revenue grew by 80% in the first 6 months after acquisition, and our customer retention rates improved dramatically as well. The results validated my investment strategy and generated interest from other institutional investors who wanted to participate in future funds. Marcus Chen was particularly pleased with Business Connect's performance, both because it demonstrated the viability of our specialized approach and because it enhanced Rodriguez Strategic Partners' reputation for operational excellence. The success led to discussions about raising a larger fund that could pursue more ambitious acquisitions, potentially including companies with revenues in the $50 to $100 million range. During this period of professional triumph, I maintained minimal contact with my family beyond the usual phone calls with Mom and occasional conversations with Abuela Luis. I wasn't deliberately avoiding Sophia and Jake's wedding preparations, but I was genuinely too busy with business development to focus on family events that felt increasingly irrelevant to my current life. Mom mentioned during one of our weekly calls that Sophia had asked whether I would be attending the wedding, which was scheduled for early June at a resort in Aspen. I told Mom that I had business commitments that weekend and wouldn't be able to participate, which was true but not the complete explanation for my absence. I had no desire to watch Sophia and Jake celebrate their union, but I also felt no bitterness about missing their special day. The emotional distance I felt from their wedding was a measure of how completely my priorities and identity had changed over the past 4 years. The woman who had been devastated by their betrayal would have been consumed by thoughts of their wedding day, either planning some form of disruption or torturing herself by imagining their happiness. The woman I had become was focused on quarterly performance reviews and investor relations, building something substantial that belonged entirely to me. 2 weeks before Sophia's wedding, I received an unexpected call from Jake asking if we could meet for coffee to discuss something personal rather than business-related. I was curious about what he wanted to say, and I agreed to meet him at a neutral location in downtown Denver where we were unlikely to encounter anyone from either of our professional networks. Jake looked nervous when he arrived at the coffee shop, fidgeting with his car keys and ordering 3 different drinks before settling on black coffee. We found a quiet table near the window where we could speak privately, and for the first few minutes we made awkward small talk about the weather and downtown construction projects. Finally, Jake took a deep breath and addressed the reason for our meeting. "Emma, I know you said you weren't interested in relitigating the past, but I need to apologize to you properly. Not as your employee to his boss, but as someone who hurt you badly and never took responsibility for it." I listened without interrupting as Jake explained how guilty he had felt about the way our relationship ended, how he had convinced himself at the time that his feelings for Sophia justified his betrayal, and how he had come to understand over the years that his actions had been selfish and cruel regardless of his emotions. "I know you've built an incredible life for yourself," he continued, "and I know that apologizing now doesn't change anything about what I did. But I needed you to know that I understand how wrong I was, and I'm sorry for the pain I caused you." His apology was sincere and thoughtful, addressing the specific ways his behavior had been hurtful, rather than offering generic expressions of regret. Appreciated that he wasn't asking for forgiveness or trying to minimize his responsibility, but simply acknowledging the harm he had caused and expressing genuine remorse. "Thank you for saying that," I replied after he finished speaking. "I know it wasn't easy to have this conversation, and I appreciate your honesty about what happened." "Can I ask you something?" Jake said hesitantly. "Are you happy now? I mean, obviously you're incredibly successful, but are you happy?" The question surprised me with its directness and apparent genuine concern. Yes, I said after considering my response. I'm happier than I've ever been. Building my own company, working with interesting clients, having the freedom to make decisions about my own life. It's exactly what I want to be doing. I'm glad, Jake said, and I could see that he meant it. You deserve that kind of success and happiness. And for what it's worth, working for you has reminded me why I respected you so much when we were together. You're an incredible leader, and Business Connect is lucky to have you as an owner. Our conversation continued for another hour, covering topics from our college memories to our current professional goals, to our respective families' well-being. The discussion felt surprisingly natural and comfortable, more like a conversation between old friends than a meeting between former romantic partners who had ended their relationship under painful circumstances. When we prepared to leave, Jake mentioned that he and Sophia would be taking their honeymoon in Europe, and that Sophia was nervous about traveling internationally for the first time. Without thinking, I found myself offering recommendations based on my solo trip to Italy, sharing insights about navigating language barriers and cultural differences that might be helpful for first-time international travelers. The fact that I could discuss Sophia and Jake's honeymoon plans without feeling pain or resentment was perhaps the clearest indication of how completely I had moved beyond the betrayal that had once defined my life. Their relationship was simply a fact of the world, like the weather or traffic patterns, something that existed but had no particular relevance to my own happiness or success. Sophia's wedding took place on a Saturday in early June, and I spent that weekend at a business conference in Austin, where I was presenting Rodriguez Capital Ventures' investment strategy to a group of pension fund managers. The conference was professionally valuable and personally satisfying, representing the kind of opportunity that would have been unimaginable during my years as a tech flow marketing director. I learned later from Mom that the wedding had been beautiful and well attended, with Sophia looking radiant in a dress that had been featured in a bridal magazine and Jake appearing nervous but happy throughout the ceremony. Abuelo Luis had walked Sophia down the aisle, and the reception had included mariachi music that reminded everyone of family celebrations from our childhood. Mom also mentioned that several wedding guests had asked about my absence, and that Sophia had seemed disappointed that I hadn't been able to attend. Apparently, Sophia had hoped that our relationship might be healing enough for me to participate in her wedding, but she understood that my business commitments made attendance impossible. The following Monday, I returned to Denver and resumed my focus on Business Connect's continued growth and the development of Rodriguez Capital Ventures' second fund. The company's performance had remained strong during my brief absence, and Jake's sales team had closed several significant deals that would contribute to our second quarter revenue targets. Throughout the summer, Business Connect's success attracted increasing attention from potential customers and competitors alike. Our customer satisfaction scores had improved dramatically since the acquisition, and our customer retention rates were among the highest in the industry. The combination of superior technology and effective marketing had created a competitive advantage that was generating substantial returns for Rodriguez Capital Ventures. By autumn, Business Connect's revenue had doubled since my acquisition of the company, and we were beginning discussions about potential expansion into new geographic markets. The company's success had exceeded even my most optimistic projections, validating the investment strategy that had initially seemed ambitious to some of our institutional investors. Jake's performance as regional sales director had been exemplary throughout this period of growth, and I promoted him to vice president of sales in October, with a salary increase and equity participation that reflected his contributions to the company's success. The promotion was based entirely on business metrics rather than any personal considerations, but I was pleased that our professional relationship had evolved into something productive and mutually beneficial. The promotion meant that Jake would be attending more senior leadership meetings and participating in strategic planning discussions about Business Connect's future. Our interactions became more frequent and collaborative as we worked together to develop expansion plans and customer acquisition strategies for new markets. During one particularly productive strategy session in November, Jake mentioned that he and Sophia were expecting their first child in the spring, and that he was grateful for the financial security that his new position provided. The news of Sophia's pregnancy generated no emotional reaction beyond polite congratulations, confirming that I had truly moved beyond any lingering attachment to either of them. As Rodriguez Capital Ventures prepared to close its second fund in December, I reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought me from devastating betrayal to business ownership and financial success. The company that had begun as Jake's employer was now generating millions of dollars in annual revenue under my leadership, creating value for investors while providing excellent careers for dozens of employees. The transformation wasn't just financial but personal as well. I had evolved from someone whose identity was primarily defined by her relationships to someone who had built substantial business assets and professional recognition. The betrayal that had initially felt like the end of my world had actually been the beginning of a journey toward independence and achievement that might never have occurred if my life had remained comfortable and predictable. The annual Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' house in Boulder provided the perfect opportunity to share news of my success with the extended family who had supported me through the difficult years following Abuelo's birthday party. I had been invited to previous Thanksgiving celebrations but had declined, claiming business commitments that were real but also convenient excuses for avoiding potentially awkward family dynamics. This year felt different, though. I was confident in my achievements and comfortable with my new identity as a successful entrepreneur. I had no desire to create drama or relitigate past conflicts, but I was ready to reconnect with family members who had wondered about my well-being during my years of self-imposed distance. I arrived at my parents' house on Thanksgiving afternoon, bringing wine and flowers as I had during happier family gatherings in the past. Mom greeted me with tears of joy and relief, and Dad hugged me with obvious pride in my professional accomplishments. Abuela Luis, now 79 and moving more slowly but still sharp as ever, smiled knowingly as I described the growth of Rodriguez Capital Ventures and Business Connect's remarkable transformation. Sophia and Jake arrived later in the afternoon, Sophia visibly pregnant and glowing with the particular happiness that seemed to characterize this phase of her life. Jake looked prosperous and content, and he greeted me warmly but respectfully, acknowledging our professional relationship without any reference to our personal history. The conversation during dinner focused primarily on family news and holiday traditions, but eventually the discussion turned to professional updates and career developments. I shared highlights from Rodriguez Capital Ventures' successful year, including our fund's impressive returns and Business Connect's revenue growth that had exceeded all expectations. "Wait," Sophia said suddenly, looking confused. "Business Connect is Jake's company, right? The one where he just got promoted to vice president?" "Actually," I said calmly, cutting another piece of turkey, "Business Connect is my company. I acquired it through my investment fund earlier this year." The silence that followed was complete and profound. Sophia's fork stopped midway to her mouth, and Jake stared at his plate, as if it contained information he was trying to decode. Mom and Dad exchanged glances, clearly unsure how to respond to this unexpected revelation. "You bought Jake's company?" Sophia asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I bought a technology company that needed better marketing strategies," I corrected gently. "Jake happens to work there, and he's been an excellent employee. His recent promotion was based entirely on his performance metrics." Sophia looked back and forth between Jake and me, trying to process the implications of what she was learning. "So Jake works for you now?" "Jake works for Business Connect, which is owned by Rodriguez Capital Ventures, which I founded and manage," I explained patiently. "It's a business relationship based on professional performance and mutual benefit." The conversation resumed gradually, but I could see that Sophia was struggling to understand how the dynamics of our relationship had shifted so dramatically. The sister she remembered as heartbroken and devastated was now in a position of considerable power over the man who had caused that devastation, yet I was treating the situation as a simple business matter rather than an opportunity for revenge. After dinner, while others were watching football in the living room, Sophia approached me privately in the kitchen where I was helping Mom with dishes. "Emma, can we talk for a minute?" We stepped outside onto the back patio where the conversation would be private, and Sophia immediately began apologizing for her behavior 4 years earlier. Her words tumbled out in a rush of guilt and regret, explaining how she had never meant to hurt me, how she had been young and foolish, how she had regretted the way everything happened. "I know you probably hate me," she said, tears starting to form in her eyes, "and I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I need you to know that I'm sorry, and I've been sorry every day since it happened." I listened to her apology with the same patience I had shown Jake's earlier in the year, recognizing that she needed to express her remorse even if I no longer required it for my own healing. "Sophia, I don't hate you. I haven't hated you for a long time." Really? She asked, looking surprised and hopeful. Really? What happened between us taught me important lessons about trust and independence. And those lessons helped me build something I'm proud of. I'm not saying it wasn't painful at the time, but I'm grateful for where that pain led me. Sophia stared at me for a long moment, clearly struggling to reconcile this response with whatever reaction she had expected. So you're not trying to get back at us by buying Jake's company? I smiled at her question, understanding why she would interpret the situation that way. Sophia, if I wanted revenge, I could have fired Jake on my first day as owner. Instead, I promoted him and gave him the largest bonus of his career. This isn't about revenge, it's about building a successful business. But doesn't it feel weird, being his boss after everything that happened? It felt weird initially, I admitted, but Jake is good at his job, and I need good employees to make my investment successful. Personal history doesn't change business fundamentals. Our conversation continued for another 20 minutes, covering everything from her pregnancy to my travel experiences to our childhood memories that remained untainted by recent complications. By the time we returned to the house, Sophia seemed more relaxed and genuinely pleased about my success, even if she still found the situation somewhat surreal. The rest of the evening passed comfortably, with family members sharing stories and catching up on news that had been missed during my years of limited contact. I found myself enjoying the familiar warmth of family gatherings, while appreciating that I no longer needed their approval or validation to feel confident about my life choices. As I prepared to leave that evening, Abuela Luis pulled me aside for a private conversation. Mija, I want you to know how proud I am of what you've accomplished. You took something that could have destroyed you and used it to build something beautiful. Thank you, Abuelo. Your support meant everything to me during the hardest times. He smiled and patted my hand gently. You know, the strongest steel is forged in the hottest fire. You've proven that adversity can create strength if you're brave enough to use it properly. Driving back to Denver that evening, I reflected on how dramatically my relationship with both my family and my own identity had evolved since that devastating night 4 years earlier. The woman who had discovered Jake and Sophia in the basement had been someone whose happiness depended on external relationships and validation. The woman driving home from Thanksgiving dinner owned a successful investment firm and had the financial resources to pursue any opportunity that interested her. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, and it hadn't been easy. Building Rodriguez Capital Ventures had required years of focused effort, professional development, and strategic thinking that had challenged me in ways I hadn't anticipated. But the results spoke for themselves. I had created something valuable and meaningful that belonged entirely to me. The following Monday brought news that Business Connect had been selected as one of Denver's fastest-growing companies by a prominent business magazine, recognition that would generate additional publicity and customer interest. The award was based on our revenue growth since the acquisition, which had exceeded 200% in less than a year. Jake stopped by my office to congratulate me on the recognition and to discuss how we might leverage the publicity for additional marketing opportunities. Our conversation was collaborative and professional, focused on strategies for converting media attention into customer acquisition. The evolution of our relationship from romantic partners to business colleagues still felt surreal occasionally, but it had become surprisingly natural and productive. As 2024 drew to a close, Rodriguez Capital Ventures had achieved returns that exceeded our investors' expectations and established a reputation for operational excellence that was attracting interest from larger institutional investors. Our success with Business Connect had validated the investment strategy and created opportunities to pursue more ambitious acquisitions in the future. I spent New Year's Eve at a small party hosted by Marcus Chen, surrounded by business partners and friends who had supported my entrepreneurial journey. The celebration felt appropriate for someone whose life had been transformed by taking calculated risks and pursuing ambitious goals despite initial uncertainty and fear. At midnight, as fireworks lit up the Denver skyline, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment of success and contentment. The betrayal that had once felt like the end of my world had actually been the beginning of a chapter defined by independence, achievement, and the deep satisfaction that comes from building something meaningful through your own efforts. Sophia and Jake's betrayal had been real and painful, but it had also cleared space in my life for growth and discovery that might never have occurred if I had remained in my comfort zone. The woman who had been devastated by their choice to be together had evolved into someone who was genuinely grateful for the lessons that devastation had taught her. As the new year began, I was already planning Rodriguez Capital Ventures' next acquisition and considering opportunities to expand our investment strategy into new markets and industries. The future held unlimited possibilities, and I had the resources, experience, and confidence to pursue whatever opportunities aligned with my vision for continued growth and success. The months following that Thanksgiving dinner brought a series of developments that would reshape not only my business empire, but also the delicate relationships I had rebuilt with my family. Rodriguez Capital Ventures had attracted the attention of several major pension funds and institutional investors who were eager to participate in our next funding round, which we were planning to close at $75 million by the end of March. Business Connect's remarkable performance had become a case study that Marcus Chen presented at private equity conferences across the country, demonstrating how targeted operational improvements could generate extraordinary returns in the technology sector. Our customer relationship management software was now being used by over 3,000 businesses nationwide, with client retention rates that exceeded 95% and revenue growth that showed no signs of slowing. Jake Thompson had proven himself to be an exceptional vice president of sales, consistently exceeding targets while building a team culture that attracted top talent from competitors throughout the region. His quarterly performance reviews reflected not only strong financial results, but also leadership qualities that I hadn't observed during our personal relationship years earlier. The professional environment seemed to bring out capabilities in him that had remained dormant during his previous roles. In February, Jake requested a meeting to discuss an opportunity that his team had identified for expanding Business Connect services into the healthcare sector. The healthcare market represented a significant growth opportunity, but it would require developing specialized features and compliance protocols that would demand substantial investment and strategic focus. We met in my corner office at Rodriguez Capital Ventures, which overlooked downtown Denver and the mountains beyond. The space reflected the success I had built over the previous 4 years, with original artwork from local artists, bookshelves lined with business strategy texts, and a conference table where I had negotiated deals worth tens of millions of dollars. Jake's presentation was thorough and compelling, demonstrating deep research into healthcare industry needs and a clear understanding of how Business Connect's technology could be adapted to serve medical practices and hospital systems. His financial projections were conservative but promising, suggesting that healthcare expansion could add $20 million in annual revenue within 3 years. "This is impressive work," I told him as he finished his presentation. "But expanding into healthcare would require us to hire specialized developers and compliance experts. We're talking about an investment of at least $5 million before we see any return." "I understand the financial commitment," Jake replied, "but I believe the opportunity justifies the risk. Healthcare organizations are desperate for better customer relationship management tools, and most existing solutions are outdated or overly complicated." I studied the financial models he had prepared, recognizing the quality of analysis that reflected either significant personal development or hidden talents that I hadn't appreciated during our college years. "Have you discussed this opportunity with Sophia?" Healthcare expansion would mean longer hours and more travel for several months. Jake's expression shifted slightly, and I could see him weighing how much personal information to share in our professional discussion. "Sophia and I have talked about it. She's supportive of my career development, especially now that we're planning for the baby's arrival in April." The mention of Sophia's pregnancy reminded me of how completely our lives had diverged since that devastating night at Abuela's birthday party. She was preparing for motherhood while I was building an investment empire. Jake was focused on career advancement while I was considering which companies to acquire next. We had all found our respective paths forward, but those paths bore little resemblance to the futures we had once imagined. I approved Jake's healthcare expansion proposal the following week, authorizing the hiring of 6 additional employees and the development budget necessary to customize our software for medical industry requirements. The decision was based entirely on business analysis, but I was also curious to see whether Jake could successfully manage a project of this scope and complexity. The healthcare expansion required Jake to travel frequently for client meetings and industry conferences, absences that became more challenging as Sophia's pregnancy progressed. She had experienced complications during her second trimester that required bed rest, which meant Jake was managing both increased professional responsibilities and personal caregiving duties. I learned about Sophia's pregnancy difficulties through Mom, who mentioned during one of our weekly phone calls that Sophia had been hospitalized briefly due to high blood pressure, and that Jake was splitting his time between work obligations and medical appointments. Mom's tone suggested concern not only for Sophia's health, but also for the stress that Jake was experiencing as he tried to balance competing demands. The information about Sophia's complications generated unexpected feelings of concern and sympathy. Despite our complicated history, she was still my sister, and the prospect of serious pregnancy problems touched something deeper than the professional distance I had maintained. I found myself thinking about her well-being during meetings and wondering whether there was anything I could do to help without overstepping boundaries. After considering the situation for several days, I decided to offer Jake additional flexibility in his work schedule to accommodate Sophia's medical needs. I called him into my office on a Friday afternoon and explained that Business Connect could provide temporary support staff for his travel requirements, and that he should prioritize family obligations during this critical period. "Emma, I can't tell you how much I appreciate this," Jake said, his relief evident in both his voice and posture. "Sophia's doctor says the next few weeks are crucial, and I've been worried about managing everything." "Take whatever time you need," I told him. "The healthcare expansion is important, but it's not more important than your family's well-being. We can adjust timelines and bring in consulting support if necessary." Jake's gratitude was genuine and touching, reminding me that beneath the professional relationship we had built was a shared history that included genuine care for each other's happiness. I might never again love him romantically, but I could still wish for his family's health and security. Sophia gave birth to a healthy daughter in mid-April, an event that Mom described with tears of joy during our next phone conversation. The baby, named Isabella Carmen Thompson, weighed 7 pounds and had inherited Sophia's dark hair and Jake's brown eyes. Mother and baby were both healthy, despite the earlier complications, and Jake was reportedly overwhelmed with happiness and new parent anxiety. I sent flowers and a thoughtful baby gift to the hospital, choosing items that were practical rather than overly personal but still reflected genuine good wishes for their new family. The gesture felt appropriate given our current relationship dynamics, acknowledging the significant life event without suggesting intimacy that no longer existed. The birth of Isabella seemed to catalyze changes in both Jake's professional focus and Sophia's perspective on family relationships. Jake became more efficient and strategic in his work approach, apparently motivated by the desire to provide security for his daughter while still being present for important family moments. Sophia, according to Mom, had expressed interest in healing her relationship with me, particularly now that she was a mother herself. Business Connect's healthcare expansion launched successfully in May, generating immediate interest from medical practices that had been struggling with outdated patient management systems. Jake's team closed several significant contracts within the first month, validating both his market analysis and his ability to execute complex sales strategies in unfamiliar industries. The success of the healthcare expansion attracted attention from larger technology companies that were interested in acquiring Business Connect or partnering with us for broader market penetration. I received several unsolicited offers to purchase the company, including one proposal that would have generated returns exceeding 400% for Rodriguez Capital Ventures investors. However, I wasn't ready to sell Business Connect, partly because the company was performing so well under my ownership, and partly because I enjoyed the operational challenges of growing a technology business. The company had become more than just an investment. It was a demonstration of my ability to create value through strategic thinking and effective leadership. In June, I decided to host Rodriguez Capital Ventures' first annual investor meeting, bringing together our limited partners to celebrate our successful year and discuss opportunities for future growth. The event would be held at a luxury resort in Vail, combining business presentations with recreational activities that would strengthen relationships with our most important stakeholders. The investor meeting required extensive planning and coordination, from selecting speakers and developing presentation materials to arranging accommodations and activities for participants and their spouses. I viewed the event as an opportunity to demonstrate the professionalism and attention to detail that characterized Rodriguez Capital Ventures' approach to business development. Marcus Chen helped me plan the agenda and identify keynote speakers who could provide valuable insights into industry trends and investment opportunities. We arranged for panels on emerging technologies, regulatory changes affecting private equity, and case studies from successful portfolio companies. Business Connect's transformation would be featured prominently as an example of our operational improvement capabilities. Jake would be presenting Business Connect's results to our investors, an opportunity that represented significant professional recognition and potential career advancement. His presentation would need to demonstrate not only the company's financial performance, but also the strategic thinking that had driven our success in the healthcare market. I worked with Jake to prepare his presentation, helping him develop talking points that would resonate with institutional investors while highlighting the operational improvements that had generated our impressive returns. The collaboration felt natural and productive, reflecting how completely our professional relationship had evolved beyond any personal complications. "Are you nervous about presenting to such a sophisticated audience?" I asked during one of our preparation sessions. "Definitely," Jake admitted, "but I'm also excited. This is the kind of opportunity I never imagined having when I was just another sales manager at someone else's company." His comment reminded me of how much both of our lives had changed since that devastating discovery in my parents' basement. Jake had evolved from a comfortable but unremarkable sales manager into a strategic leader who was building valuable capabilities in emerging markets. I had transformed from a heartbroken marketing director into a successful entrepreneur who was creating opportunities for dozens of employees while generating substantial returns for institutional investors. The investor meeting in Vail exceeded my expectations in every measurable way. Our limited partners were impressed with Business Connect's performance and enthusiastic about Rodriguez Capital Ventures' strategy for future acquisitions. Jake's presentation was particularly well received, with several investors commenting on his strategic insights and leadership capabilities. During the informal networking sessions, I had conversations with pension fund managers and family office principals who were interested in increasing their allocations to our future funds. The positive feedback confirmed that Rodriguez Capital Ventures had established credibility within the institutional investment community and created opportunities for significant growth. One particularly meaningful moment came during the final dinner, when Marcus Chen delivered remarks about our partnership and the vision we shared for creating value through operational excellence. His comments acknowledged not only our professional success but also the personal journey that had led me to entrepreneurship and the resilience that had enabled me to build something meaningful from devastating loss. Following the investor meeting, Business Connect received a strategic partnership offer from a major healthcare technology company that wanted to integrate our customer relationship management tools with their electronic medical record systems. The partnership would provide access to thousands of potential customers while generating licensing revenue that could exceed $10 million annually. Jake led the negotiations for the partnership agreement, working with our legal team to structure terms that would benefit Business Connect while protecting our intellectual property and maintaining operational independence. His performance during these complex discussions demonstrated negotiation skills and strategic thinking that impressed both our partners and our internal team. The partnership agreement was finalized in August, generating immediate revenue growth and establishing Business Connect as a recognized leader in healthcare customer relationship management. The success validated our expansion strategy while creating opportunities for additional partnerships and potential acquisition offers from larger competitors. As Business Connect's profile within the healthcare industry grew, Jake was invited to speak at conferences and industry events, sharing insights about customer relationship management, best practices, and technology adoption strategies. These speaking opportunities enhanced both his professional reputation and Business Connect's market position, creating a virtuous cycle of recognition and business development. During this period of professional success, I began considering whether the time was right to explore an exit strategy for Business Connect that would generate maximum returns for Rodriguez Capital Ventures investors. The company's valuation had increased dramatically since our acquisition, and several potential acquirers had expressed serious interest in purchasing the business. However, any exit strategy would need to consider the impact on Business Connect's employees, including Jake and his team, who had contributed significantly to our success. I was committed to ensuring that any transaction would provide appropriate recognition and financial rewards for the people who had made our growth possible. In September, I received a formal acquisition offer from a Fortune 500 healthcare technology company that valued Business Connect at $48 million, nearly 4 times what Rodriguez Capital Ventures had paid for the company 18 months earlier. The offer included retention bonuses for key employees and commitments to maintain Business Connect's operational independence for at least 3 years. The acquisition offer represented a significant decision point for Rodriguez Capital Ventures and for my own entrepreneurial journey. Selling Business Connect would generate extraordinary returns for our investors and provide capital for pursuing larger acquisition opportunities. However, it would also end my direct involvement with the company that had served as the foundation for my success as an investor and operator. I scheduled a meeting with Jake to discuss the acquisition offer and its potential impact on his career and family plans. The conversation would be delicate, requiring me to balance transparency about the business opportunity with sensitivity about how the transaction might affect his future prospects. We met at a quiet restaurant in downtown Denver where we could discuss the situation privately without risking interruption from colleagues or clients. Jake arrived precisely on time, as he always did for important meetings, and I could see both curiosity and concern in his expression as we settled into our booth. "Jake, I want to discuss something with you that will significantly affect Business Connect's future," I began. "We've received a substantial acquisition offer that the board is considering seriously." I explained the terms of the offer, including the financial benefits for Rodriguez Capital Ventures and the commitments regarding employee retention and operational independence. Jake listened carefully, asking thoughtful questions about timing, integration plans, and his own role within the acquiring company's structure. "What do you think about the opportunity?" I asked after presenting all the relevant information. "From a business perspective, it sounds like an excellent outcome for everyone involved," Jake replied. "The acquiring company has resources that could accelerate our growth, and the financial terms seem very favorable." "And from a personal perspective?" Jake was quiet for a moment, considering his response. "It's surreal to think that a company I've helped build might be sold for nearly $50 million. When I started working there, Business Connect was struggling to reach $8 million in annual revenue. You've played a crucial role in that transformation," I acknowledged. "Your leadership in the healthcare expansion was essential to our success, and any acquirer would be lucky to retain your services." "Emma, can I ask you something?" Jake said, his tone becoming more personal. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been if we had handled our relationship differently 4 years ago?" The question surprised me with its directness and its timing. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but I've learned that wondering about alternative histories isn't particularly productive. We both made choices that led us to where we are now, and I'm grateful for the journey even though it was painful at times." "I'm grateful too, in a way," Jake said. "What happened forced me to think more seriously about what I wanted from life and career. Working for you has challenged me to develop capabilities I didn't know I had." Our conversation continued for another hour, covering topics from our college memories to our current family situations to our respective hopes for the future. The discussion felt honest and reflective, acknowledging both the pain of our shared history and the growth that had emerged from navigating that difficult period. When we prepared to leave, Jake thanked me for handling the acquisition process with transparency and consideration for employee impacts. "You could have made this decision without consulting anyone, but you chose to include the people who would be affected. That says something important about the kind of leader you've become." I accepted the acquisition offer the following week, after confirming that all key employees would receive retention bonuses and equity participation in the transaction. The sale of Business Connect would generate returns exceeding 350% for Rodriguez Capital Ventures investors, establishing our reputation as one of the most successful emerging private equity firms in the region. The acquisition closing was scheduled for early November, which would provide time for due diligence and regulatory approvals, while allowing Business Connect's team to prepare for integration with their new parent company. Jake would be promoted to Senior Vice President of Healthcare Solutions, with responsibility for expanding the partnership strategy we had developed. As the closing date approached, I reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought me from devastating betrayal to business success worth tens of millions of dollars. The woman who had discovered Jake and Sophia in my parents' basement could never have imagined that she would eventually own the company where Jake worked. much less sell it for a price that would establish her financial independence for life. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, and it hadn't been easy. Building Rodriguez Capital Ventures had required years of focused effort, strategic thinking, and professional development that had challenged me in ways I couldn't have anticipated. But the results spoke for themselves. I had created something valuable and meaningful that belonged entirely to me. The Business Connect acquisition closed on a crisp Friday morning in November, exactly 4 years and 7 months after I had walked away from Abuelo's birthday party, with my heart broken and my future uncertain. The transaction was completed in Rodriguez Capital Ventures conference room, surrounded by lawyers and investment bankers who had worked for months to structure the deal. After signing the final documents, I walked to my office window and looked out at the Denver skyline, thinking about the journey that had brought me to this moment of triumph. The city looked different than it had when I first moved to the Highlands neighborhood. Or perhaps I was seeing it through different eyes. The woman standing at that window was someone who had built substantial wealth through her own efforts, someone who had transformed devastating loss into extraordinary opportunity. That evening, I hosted a celebration dinner for the Business Connect team, recognizing their contributions to our success and wishing them well in their new roles with the acquiring company. Jake gave a speech thanking everyone for their dedication and acknowledging the strategic vision that had made their success possible. 4 years ago, Business Connect was a struggling technology company with great potential but limited market traction, Jake said during his remarks. Today, we're part of a Fortune 500 organization with resources to expand our impact across the healthcare industry. That transformation was possible because someone believed in our potential and provided the leadership necessary to realize it. The following Monday brought news that Rodriguez Capital Ventures had been selected to manage a new fund focused on healthcare technology investments, leveraging our success with Business Connect to attract commitments from pension funds and university endowments. The new fund would have $200 million in committed capital, making it one of the largest healthcare-focused private equity funds managed by a woman-owned firm. The healthcare fund represented an opportunity to scale our investment strategy and create even greater impact within an industry that desperately needed better technology solutions. I would be able to apply lessons learned from Business Connect's transformation to help other healthcare technology companies achieve their growth potential. Christmas Eve dinner at my parents' house in Boulder provided the perfect setting to share news of my latest professional achievements with family members who had supported me through the most difficult period of my life. I arrived bearing gifts and wine, as had been our family tradition for as long as I could remember. Sophia and Jake were there with Isabella, now 8 months old, and beginning to crawl around my parents' living room with the determined energy that characterizes babies discovering mobility. Sophia looked healthy and happy, having recovered completely from her pregnancy complications, and Jake appeared confident and content in his new role as both father and senior executive. The evening's conversation touched on many topics, from Isabella's latest developmental milestones to Dad's retirement plans, to Mom's volunteer work with local charities. Eventually, the discussion turned to professional updates and career news, providing an opportunity for me to share highlights from Rodriguez Capital Ventures' successful year. So let me understand this correctly, Sophia said as I explained the Business Connect acquisition. You bought Jake's company for $12 million and sold it for $48 million in less than 2 years? That's essentially accurate, I confirmed. Though the success was really the result of operational improvements and strategic expansion that the entire team implemented together. And now, you're starting a $200 million fund focused on healthcare investments? We're launching the fund in January, with commitments from institutional investors who were impressed by our returns and operational capabilities. Sophia shook her head in amazement. Emma, I knew you were successful, but I didn't realize you were building something this substantial. You're basically a finance mogul now. Her comment made everyone laugh, including me, though there was truth in her observation. Rodriguez Capital Ventures had grown from an ambitious idea into a significant business enterprise that was creating opportunities for dozens of employees while generating substantial returns for pension funds and university endowments. Later that evening, as family members were exchanging gifts and enjoying dessert, Sophia approached me privately near the kitchen, where we could speak without others overhearing our conversation. Emma, I want to thank you for everything you've done for Jake and our family, she said, her voice sincere and emotional. I know the situation between us has been complicated, but you've been incredibly generous and professional despite everything that happened. Sophia, Jake earned his success through his own efforts and capabilities, I replied. My role was simply providing opportunities for him to demonstrate what he could accomplish, but you could have made things difficult for him, and instead you helped him advance his career. That means everything to me, especially now that we have Isabella to think about. Her gratitude was genuine and touching, representing a level of emotional maturity that I hadn't observed during our younger years. Motherhood seemed to have given Sophia new perspective on relationships and responsibilities, helping her understand the complexity of forgiveness and professional obligation. I'm glad things worked out well for all of us, I told her. We've all found our paths forward, and that's what matters most. Our conversation continued for several more minutes, covering topics from Isabella's personality to Sophia's thoughts about returning to work, to her hopes for rebuilding our sisterly relationship. The discussion felt natural and healing, suggesting that time and mutual success had created space for forgiveness and renewed connection. As I prepared to leave my parents' house that evening, Abuelo Luis pulled me aside for one of our private conversations that had become meaningful touchstones throughout my journey toward independence and success. Mija, watching you build your business has been one of the greatest joys of my old age, he said, his voice warm with pride and affection. You took something that could have destroyed you and used it to build something beautiful and meaningful. Thank you, Abuelo. Your wisdom and support meant everything during the hardest times. You know, the strongest people are not those who never face adversity, but those who transform adversity into opportunity, he continued. You've shown that betrayal and loss can become the foundation for building something extraordinary. Driving back to Denver that evening, I reflected on the remarkable changes that had occurred in all our lives since that devastating night at Abuelo's 75th birthday party. Sophia and Jake had built a loving family and were raising a beautiful daughter together. Jake had advanced from struggling sales manager to senior executive at a Fortune 500 company. I had transformed from heartbroken marketing director to successful entrepreneur managing hundreds of millions in investment capital. Most importantly, we had all learned to coexist peacefully and even supportively, despite the painful history that connected us. The betrayal that had once seemed insurmountable had become simply one chapter in longer stories of growth, achievement, and personal development. The new year brought fresh opportunities and challenges as Rodriguez Capital Ventures launched our healthcare-focused fund and began evaluating potential acquisitions across the medical technology sector. The fund's success would depend on our ability to identify companies with strong fundamentals but operational challenges that our expertise could address. I was no longer the devastated woman who had fled from Abuelo's birthday party 4 years earlier, uncertain about her future and crushed by unexpected betrayal. I had become someone who created opportunities rather than waiting for them, someone who built value through strategic thinking and operational excellence. Someone who had learned that the most devastating setbacks can become the foundation for extraordinary achievements. The journey from betrayal to triumph had taught me that resilience is not about avoiding pain, but about transforming pain into purpose. Sophia and Jake's choice to be together had initially felt like the end of my world, but it had actually been the beginning of a chapter defined by independence, achievement, and the deep satisfaction that comes from building something meaningful through your own vision and effort. As I looked toward the future, I saw unlimited possibilities for growth and impact. Rodriguez Capital Ventures was positioned to become a major force in healthcare technology investing, creating value for investors while helping innovative companies scale their operations and serve more customers. The betrayal that had once defined my lowest moment had become the catalyst for achievements that exceeded anything I had previously imagined possible. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.